This revenge story contains intense acts of retribution that may be excessive and could be disturbing to some viewers.
I stumbled through the door after another midnight haul, the Portland drizzle clinging to my jacket like a second skin. The apartment was dead quiet, just the faint hum of the fridge and the drip of the kitchen faucet. Mia was already gone, off to her early shift at the gym. Her lavender shampoo lingered in the air, sharp and familiar, a ghost of the girl I used to know. I tossed my keys onto the counter, the clatter loud in the stillness, and slumped onto the couch. My boots felt like anchors, but I didn't bother kicking them off. At 6 foot -3 and 320 pounds, everything feels heavy after a night behind the wheel. The place was a mesher gym bag slumped by the door, my work gloves tossed on the table, dishes piled in the sink. It was like we were two strangers sharing a zip code. I grabbed a beer from the fridge, popped it open, and took a long swig. The cold fizz burned my throat. That's when I saw it. The stack of DVDs by the television was off. Not a lot, just enough to bug me. My action flicks, the ones I'd watched 100 times to unwind, were jumbled. Die Hard was behind, The Matrix, and my favorite, Rocky, was upside down. My gut twisted. Someone had been messing with my stuff, and there was only one other person with a key. Mia and I had been together since senior year. I'd pulled some punks off her outside the locker rooms, and she'd looked at me like I was some kind of hero. 2 years into marriage, though, that look was long gone. No kids, no plans, just me grinding through night shifts, and her barking about how I'd let myself go. I glanced at the stack of fitness mags on the coffee table, dog-eared from years of use. Training was my thing, my escape. I'd taught myself everything, flipping tires in the backyard, shadowboxing with a broomstick. It kept me sane, even if Mia didn't get it. But those DVDs, I leaned forward, squinting. Had she been watching them? Laughing at my taste? Or worse, had someone else been here? The thought made my skin crawl. I took another swig, trying to shake it off, but the suspicion stuck like gum on a shoe. I'd always trusted Mia, even when she started pulling away. But it felt wrong. I stood up, pacing the small living room. The rain tapped against the window, a steady drip that matched my pulse. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe she just bumped the stack while cleaning. But Mia didn't clean. She barely noticed the mess. I stopped by the television, running a finger along the DVD cases. Dust coated my fingertip. No, something was off. I needed to know. I wasn't the type to snoop, but I wasn't a fool either. I'd figure this out my way, like I always did. I glanced at the clock, 6:30 a.m., plenty of time before my next shift. I'd set up a camera, nothing fancy, just enough to catch what was going on. If it was nothing, fine. If not, well, I'd deal with that when I had to. I grabbed my jacket, heading for the door. The unease clung to me tighter than the rain. Whatever was coming, I'd face it head on. I always did. I stood in the middle of the living room, the faint hum of the fridge cutting through the oppressive silence. My hands were steady, deliberate, but inside, my thoughts churned like a gathering storm. I'd made up my mind to set up a camera-cheap security cam from the hardware store. Nothing sophisticated. If Mia was messing with my things, or worse, letting someone else into our apartment, I needed proof. I wasn't the type to pry into her life, not usually, but suspicion had taken root, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being played. I scanned the room, searching for a spot to hide the camera. My eyes landed on the stack of fitness magazines piled on the coffee table, worn dog-eared pages filled with training routines I'd practically memorized. They were my lifeline, a testament to years of discipline. I slid the camera behind them, nudging it into place so the lens had a clear shot of the living room. It could see the couch, the television, and the doorway, everything I needed. If someone walked in, they'd be caught. As I tweaked the angle, my gaze drifted to Mia's gym bag, slouched by the door like it had given up. Her water bottle jutted out half empty, a silent marker of her coming and going without so much as a glance my way. Nearby, my work gloves sat on the table, streaked with dirt from the loading dock. In the kitchen, the sink overflowed with dishes me late-night protein shakes mixed with her abandoned salads. The clutter told a story of two people drifting apart, living in the same space but miles away from each other. I stepped back, giving the setup one last look. The camera was discreet enough Mia wouldn't notice unless she was searching, and she never bothered with my corner of the mess. Good enough. I grabbed my jacket, the weight of it settling over my shoulders as I headed out. Rain tapped against the window, a steady rhythm that felt like a warning I didn't want to hear. I locked the door behind me and made for the truck. Work was waiting, and I couldn't be late. The city blurred past as I drove, the truck's engine roaring to life, drowning out everything else. Rain streaked the windshield, and the wipers thumped in time with my pulse. I cranked the heater, the warm air blasting against the chill seeping through the glass. Alone with my thoughts, the silence of the apartment gave way to a flood of memories and doubts I couldn't outrun. High school flashed through my mind, me on the field, flipping through cheer routines with a grace I could never touch. She was small but fierce, a fireball of energy, while I hulked on the sidelines, the big guy who didn't belong. I'd watch her from the bleachers, my hands shoved in my pockets, feeling like an outsider despite the strength I carried. That day, I pulled those punks off her, though. Everything changed. She looked at me like I was her hero. Her eyes had sparkled with something I hadn't seen since. Now, that girl was gone. 2 years of marriage had worn us down, and I didn't know where we'd lost it. Maybe it was me, the extra weight I'd put on, the way I'd let the apartment turn into a dump. Or maybe it was her, pulling away, her smiles replaced with sighs. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, the leather creaking under my palms. She didn't look at me anymore, not the way she used to. And the DVDs, why would she touch them? She hated my action movies, always muttering about the noise. It didn't add up. My mind spiraled. What if someone else was here? Some guy sprawled on my couch, flipping through my collection while I hauled freight in the rain. The image twisted in my gut, sharp and sour. I clenched my jaw, forcing it down. I didn't have proof, not yet. The camera would show me. If she was cheating, I'd know. If she wasn't, maybe I was just losing it. Either way, I'd set the trap. Now I had to wait. I'd always been good at solving problems solo. Training taught me that push through the reps. Figure it out. No excuses. This was the same. I'd handle it always. The rain pounded harder as I pulled into the depot, the truck's growl fading as I cut the engine. Silence rushed back, heavy and familiar, mirroring the quiet I'd left behind at home. I sat there for a beat, staring at the loading docks through the downpour. The fluorescent lights buzzed, casting jagged shadows across the wet pavement. Whatever was coming, I'd face it head on. I grabbed my gloves and stepped out, the rain soaking through my jacket in seconds. The cold stung, but I welcomed it, kept me sharp. Work loomed ahead, a long night of lifting and loading, but my mind stayed tethered to that camera, waiting for the truth to come into focus. I shoved the key into the lock, the metal scraping as I twisted it. The door creaked open, and I stepped into the apartment, the stillness hitting me like a wall. It was too early for the sun to do more than peek through the blinds, casting thin stripes of gray light across the hardwood floor. The air smelled stale, a mix of last night's takeout and something heavier, like regret. I kicked off my boots, the thud muffled by the rug, and tossed my jacket over the arm of the chair. My eyes flicked to the stack of fitness magazines on the coffee table, the tiny camera still tucked behind them, out of sight. I'd spent the night unloading boxes at the depot, my muscles aching, but sleep wasn't on the table, not yet. I crossed the room in 3 quick strides, my pulse already ticking up. The laptop sat on the kitchen counter, lid half closed, like it knew what was coming. I grabbed the SD card from the camera, my fingers fumbling for a split second before I slid it into the slot. The screen blinked on, and I clicked through the folders until I found the footage file. My thumb hovered over the play button, a knot twisting in my gut. Part of me wanted to chuck the card out the window and pretend I'd never set the damn thing up. But the other part, the part that had been chewing on suspicion for weeks, needed to know. I hit play. The footage was grainy, the angle off-kilter from its hiding spot, but it didn't matter. It was clear enough. Mia paced the living room, her phone pressed to her ear, her back to the lens. She was in her gym gear black leggings, a cropped tank top, hair yanked into a messy bun. Her voice cut through the speakers, low and sharp, slicing the morning quiet like a blade. "Andrew's at work now," she said, casual as if she were ordering coffee. "Yeah, the usual motel. See you there." My stomach lurched. I leaned closer, squinting at the screen, like staring harder could rewrite what I'd just heard. She turned just enough for me to catch her profile, the smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. She hung up, tossed the phone onto the couch, and grabbed her gym bag. The door slammed shut behind her, the sound bouncing off the walls of the empty apartment. I hit replay, my jaw locked so tight it hurt. Her words played again, each one digging deeper, the betrayal sinking into me like cold steel. The apartment's silence pressed in, broken only by the faint hum of the fridge. I wasn't imagining this. She was cheating, with some guy at a motel. My fists clenched, nails biting into my palms. I'd trusted her hell. I'd built my whole damn world around her, and this was what I got. But I needed more. The footage was a punch to the gut, but it wasn't enough to seal it. I needed to hear it all, to catch her in the act so there'd be no squirming out of it. I stood, pacing the tight space between the couch and the counter, my boots scuffing the floor. My gaze landed on her gym bag, slumped by the door where she dumped it yesterday. An idea clicked into place. I had an old IC recorder, the cheap kind I used to log deliveries at work. Small, easy to hide. If I could slip it into her bag, I'd have her dead to rights. I yanked open the kitchen drawer, digging past pens and takeout menus until I found it. The recorder was cold in my hand, its plastic edges smooth and unassuming. I crossed to her bag, the zipper already half open, a towel and water bottle spilling out. My heart hammered as I shot a glance at the door, half expecting her to barge in and catch me. But the place stayed quiet. I unzipped the bag further, sliding the recorder into a side pocket, tucking it between a protein bar and a pair of rolled-up socks. It was a small move, but it felt like a middle finger to the mess she'd made of us. I zipped the bag shut and stepped back. Now it was a waiting game. She'd be home soon, grab her stuff, and head out again. If she went to that motel, if she met him, I'd have it all on tape. I dropped onto the couch, the cushions sinking under me, and stared at the clock. Each tick dragged, the seconds stretching into hours. I flipped through a fitness mag, but the words wouldn't stick. All I could hear was her voice on that footage. The smirk I'd seen 100 times turned into something ugly. The door clicked open mid-afternoon. Mia breezed in, cheeks pink from the gym, her ponytail swinging. She barely looked at me, tossing a quick hey over her shoulder before snagging her bag and disappearing into the bedroom. My pulse thudded in my ears, but she didn't notice a thing. Minutes later, she was gone again, the door slamming behind her. I was up before dawn the next morning, the apartment still cloaked in shadows. She was passed out in bed, and I moved fast, retrieving the recorder from her bag with steady hands. Back in the kitchen, I plugged it into the laptop, the fan's hum filling the silence. I hit play, and the crackle of the recording spilled out. It started with muffled noise cars rolling by, the rustle of the bag. Then her voice cut in, clear and close. "If Andrew asks me tonight, I'll say yes keeps the guilt off, you know?" My breath snagged in my throat. A guy's voice answered, smooth and smug. "My wife could learn a thing or two from you, Mia." They laughed, light and easy, like they were mocking me over beers. I froze, the words seeping into me like slow poison. Each one twisted deeper, their casual intimacy laid bare in the crackle of the recording. It talked about me like I was a chore, a box to check off. My hand shook as I gripped the counter, the cold edge biting into my skin. I hurled the laptop across the room to scream until my throat gave out, but I couldn't move. I just sat there, staring at the screen, the fan's hum swallowing everything else. The shock hit first, sharp and jagged, but it dulled fast, sinking into a cold, hollow acceptance. I'd known somewhere deep down, but hearing her voice, hearing her plan, it tripped away the last thread of doubt. I should have seen it coming. The late nights, the brushed-off questions, the way her eyes slid past mine, it was all there, and I'd been too dumb to connect the dots. But now I had it proof, hard and undeniable. A strange relief crept in, bitter as it was. I wasn't losing my mind. I wasn't the paranoid boyfriend she'd probably call me if I'd asked. I leaned back, closing my eyes, letting the anger flicker beneath the surface. It wasn't a blaze knot yet, just a steady ember, held back by the weight of losing her. Mia, the girl I'd put on a pedestal, the cheerleader who'd picked me out of the crowd. That Mia was dead, replaced by this stranger who laughed about me behind my back. The recording looped, their voices fading into static. I opened my eyes, staring at the laptop. I'd confront her, but not now. I'd play it smart, gather more, make sure they couldn't wriggle free. I stood, legs heavy, and shuffled to the window. The city sprawled below, gray and cold, rain streaking the glass. I wasn't the good guy anymore, but I wasn't the sucker either. I'd handle this my way, like always. The anger glowed brighter, controlled, and patient. Whatever came next, I'd be ready. I kicked off my boots by the door, the faint thud swallowed by the thick rug. The apartment was dark, save for the single lamp in the corner casting a weak glow across the room. Shadows stretched long and thin, pooling in the corners like unspoken secrets. The air felt heavy, thick with the weight of things unsaid, and the faint scent of Mia's lavender shampoo lingered, clinging to the stillness. I tossed my jacket over the arm of the couch and glanced at the clock. 9:45 p.m. Another late shift done, another night slipping away. Mia was already home, sprawled on the couch with her phone, scrolling through something mindless. She didn't look up when I came in, just muttered a half-hearted, "Hey," without breaking her focus. I stood there for a beat, watching her, the soft light catching the curve of her cheek, the way her hair fell loose around her shoulders. She was still beautiful, still the girl I'd fallen for, but it didn't hit the same anymore. Not after what I'd seen, not after what I knew. I crossed the room, my steps slow, deliberate. The floorboards creaked under my weight, a reminder of how out of place I felt in my own home. I dropped onto the couch beside her, the cushions sinking beneath me. She shifted slightly, making space but not enough to invite closeness. I let the silence stretch, thick and uncomfortable, before I spoke. "How about tonight?" The words slipped out casually, almost like an afterthought, but I kept my voice steady, watching her from the corner of my eye. She blinked, her thumb freezing mid-scroll. For a second, her body stiffened, just enough for me to notice. Then she shrugged, her lips curving into a small, forced smile. Sure, why not? Her voice was light, but there was a flicker of something beneath its surprise or suspicion. She set her phone down, turning to face me, her eyes searching mine for a beat too long. I leaned back, stretching my arms across the back of the couch, trying to look relaxed. But inside, my gut churned. This was a test, a game I didn't want to play but couldn't avoid. I needed to see how far she'd go, how deep the lie ran. I hated that I had to sit here, pretending everything was fine when it was all rotting from the inside. Mia scooted closer, her hand resting on my knee, the touch familiar but hollow. I could feel the warmth of her skin through my jeans, but it didn't spark anything anymore. just a dull ache where something used to be. She tilted her head, her hair brushing my shoulder, and for a split second, I saw a glimpse of the old Miatha one who used to laugh at my dumb jokes, the one who'd drag me to the gym even though I'd rather lift in the backyard. But that Mia was gone, buried under lies and motel receipts. I cleared my throat, forcing a grin. You know, I've been working on this new move, something I saw online. I kept my tone light, playful, but there was an edge to it, sharp enough to cut if she listened close. She raised an eyebrow, her smirk widening. Oh yeah? What kind of move? I shifted, turning to face her fully. It's called the reverse camel clutch. Supposed to be killer for flexibility. I was making it up, pulling the name from some half-remembered wrestling match, but it didn't matter. The point was to throw her off, to see how she'd react to something absurd. Mia laughed, the sound bright but brittle. You're so weird, Andrew. She shook her head, but her eyes darted away. Just for a second, like she was trying to figure out if I was onto her. I leaned in, my hands moving to her waist, pulling her closer. She didn't resist, but there was a stiffness in her spine, a hesitation that hadn't been there before. I guided her into a clumsy approximation of the move, her back arching slightly as I pretended to stretch her. It was awkward, ridiculous, and I could feel her holding back a real laugh. See? Told you it was killer, I muttered, my breath brushing her ear. She squirmed, giggling despite herself. Okay, you win. This is dumb. She wriggled free, sitting up straight, her cheeks flushed. For a moment her eyes softened, and I saw it, the old spark, the girl who used to look at me like I was her whole world. It flickered there, fragile and fleeting, and something in my chest twisted. But I wasn't here for that. Not anymore. I pulled her close, my arms wrapping around her, and whispered, I love you. The words felt like ash in my mouth, dry and bitter. But I needed to see how she'd react. Needed to know if she'd say it back, if she'd lie to my face one more time. She hesitated, just a beat too long before murmuring, love you too. Her voice was soft, but it didn't reach her eyes. She leaned into me, resting her head on my shoulder, but the closeness felt like a performance, a script we were both too tired to believe. I held her there, the silence settling over us like a shroud. My mind raced, replaying the footage, the recorder's crackle, the smug laugh of the guy she was screwing behind my back. Ian. The name burned in my throat. I wanted to shake her, to scream the truth in her face, but I swallowed it down. Not yet. I needed to catch them together, to have it all laid out so she couldn't squirm away. But sitting there, with her warmth pressed against me, I felt the pull of the past, the weight of what we used to be. It clawed at me, begging me to let it go, to pretend none of it mattered. For a second, I almost gave in. Almost. Then I remembered her voice on the recording, the way she'd laughed about me, and the ember of anger flared hot and bright. I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. I pulled back, forcing a smile. You're right, that move's dumb. Maybe I'll stick to the basics. She chuckled, the tension easing from her shoulders. Yeah, maybe. She stood, stretching, her back to me as she headed for the bedroom. I'm gonna crash. You coming? I nodded, watching her disappear through the doorway. The room felt colder without her, the shadows deeper. I stayed on the couch, staring at the blank television screen, my reflection distorted in the glass. The test was over, and she'd passed or failed depending on how you looked at it. She was still playing the part, but I was done being the fool. I stood, my legs heavy, and shuffled to the window. The city sprawled below, a tangle of lights and rain-slicked streets. I wasn't the good guy anymore, but I wasn't the sucker either. Tomorrow I'd set the final trap. Tomorrow I'd catch them in the act, and then I'd burn it all down. But for now, I'd play along. I'd sleep next to her, pretend everything was fine, and wait for the moment to strike. The anger simmered, steady and patient. I'd handle this my way, like always. The laptop screen glowed in the dim apartment, casting jagged shadows across the walls. I stared at the frozen footage, my breath catching in my throat. There they were, Ian sprawled across my couch, legs kicked up like he owned the place, and Mia beside him, her laughter spilling out like a melody I'd once cherished. Now, it was a blade, slicing through me with every frame. The timestamp in the corner blinked 2:17 a.m., a detail that burned into my skull. My hands gripped the edge of the counter, the cold steel grounding me as my knuckles whitened. The apartment was silent except for the faint buzz of the fridge and the distant wail of a siren weaving through the city streets. Inside me, though, a storm churned rage, betrayal, and a sick, hollow ache colliding in waves. I'd suspected it for weeks. The late nights, the vague excuses, the way Mia's eyes darted away when I asked where she'd been. But suspicion was a whisper. This footage was a scream. The hidden camera I'd installed after finding a motel receipt in her purse had caught everything her leading Ian through our door, their hands brushing too long, her nervous glance around the room before they settled on the couch, then the laughter, the casual ease of their betrayal, playing out in my own home. My stomach twisted, bile clawing up my throat. I slammed the laptop shut, the sharp click ricocheting like a gunshot in the stillness. For a moment, I didn't move. My chest heaved, breaths ragged and uneven, my pulse hammering in my ears. The anger was alive now, a beast surging through my veins, hot and untamed. I wanted to smash the laptop, to rip the couch apart, to erase every trace of them from this space. But that wouldn't be enough. That wouldn't make them feel the weight of what they'd done. No, I needed control. I needed them to face me, to choke on their own guilt. I snatched Mia's phone from the coffee table, my fingers trembling as I scrolled to Ian's number. My thumb hovered over the call button, a flicker of hesitation drowned by the fury roaring inside me. I pressed it, lifting the phone to my ear. It rang once, twice, then his voice slithered through smooth, cocky, oblivious. "Mia, what's up? Thought we weren't supposed to." "It's not Mia," I said, my voice a low growl rough as splintered wood. "It's Andrew." Silence stretched across the line, then a sharp, shaky breath. "Andrew? Hey man, what's going on?" His tone wavered, panic seeping through the cracks. I could picture him sweating, eyes wide, scrambling for an excuse. "You're finished, Ian," I said, each word deliberate, heavy with menace. "I know everything. I've got it all on tape, the motel, my apartment, you and Mia laughing like I'm some kind of joke. You thought you could walk into my house, into my life, and take what's mine?" "Andrew, listen. It's not what you think," he stammered, his voice high and desperate. "Don't," I snapped, cutting him off. "Don't lie to me. You're gonna tell Sarah. Everything. Then you're gonna get your ass here in 1 hour. Bring her with you. If you don't, I'll make sure everyone knows your boss, your friends, your family. I'll burn your whole damn life to the ground." The line crackled with tension, his breathing uneven. Finally, he muttered, Okay, I'll be there." His voice was small, defeated. I ended the call without a word, tossing the phone onto the couch. My hands shook, adrenaline blazing through me like wildfire. I paced the room, my boots thudding against the hardwood, each step a ticking clock counting down to the confrontation. The air felt thick, suffocating, the walls pressing in. I stopped by the window, staring out at the rain-slick street's below lights flickering, reflections shimmering in puddles, a world oblivious to the wreckage unfolding here. Exactly 1 hour later, a knock jolted me from my thoughts. I crossed the room in 2 strides and flung the door open. Ian stood there, pale as death, sweat beading on his forehead. A red handprint glowed on his cheek, the outline of fingers stark against his clammy skin. Behind him loomed a woman, Sarah, his wife, I guessed. She was tall, her dark hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, her eyes sharp and unyielding. Her arms were crossed, her posture rigid, radiating a quiet fury that made the air hum. "You, Andrew?" she asked, her voice steady, cutting through the silence like a blade. I nodded, stepping aside. "Come in." Ian shuffled past, his shoulders hunched, his gaze fixed on the floor. Sarah followed, her heels clicking with precision, each step a declaration of intent. I shut the door behind them, the click locking us into this moment. I turned to Ian, my fists clenched at my sides. "You thought you could screw around with my wife in my own house?" My voice trembled with barely contained rage, each syllable dripping with venom. "You thought I wouldn't find out?" He flinched, his eyes darting up briefly before dropping again. "Two didn't mean for it to happen," he mumbled, his voice cracking. "It just—" "Shut up," I roared, stepping closer, my shadow swallowing him. "I don't want your excuses. You're a coward, Ian. A pathetic, spineless coward who thought he could play me for a fool." Sarah moved forward, her gaze flickering between us. "Can I deal with him?" she asked, her tone cold, measured, like a judge passing sentence. I met her eyes, seeing the steel there, the mirror of my own resolve. "He's yours," I said, stepping back. "I've got no use for him." She gave a tight nod and turned to Ian. "You're coming home with me," she said, her voice unwavering. "You're going to tell me every detail of every lie, every secret. Then you're going to pack your bags and get out of my life. You don't get to beg, you don't get to explain. You made this mess, and now you drown in it." Ian's face crumpled, his mouth opening and closing uselessly. "Sarah, please." "No," she said, her hand slashing through the air. "You've got nothing left to say that I want to hear." She grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into his sleeve, and dragged him toward the door. He stumbled after her, a broken man unraveling with every step. Sarah paused at the threshold, glancing back at me, a look of weary gratitude, tinged with exhaustion, before shoving Ian out. The door slammed shut, the bang echoing through the apartment. The silence that followed was deafening, pressing down on me like a physical weight. My chest heaved, the adrenaline still buzzing, but beneath it a cold emptiness spread. I wasn't done yet. There was still Mia. The bedroom door creaked open, and she stepped out, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. She'd heard it all, I could tell, from the way her hands shook, the way she gripped the doorframe for support. Her hair was tangled, her shirt wrinkled, like she'd been pacing in there, waiting for the storm to break. "Andrew," she whispered, her voice fragile, breaking on the edges. "I can explain." I turned to her, my expression hard as stone. "Explain what?" "How you've been sleeping with Ian behind my back. How you brought him here, into our home, and laughed about it." I took a step closer, my voice rising, raw and jagged. "I saw it, Mia, every second of it." Tears spilled down her cheeks, her breath hitching. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen. It got out of control." "Out of control?" I barked a harsh laugh, the sound bitter and hollow. "You don't get to play the victim here. You chose this. You chose him. Please," she sobbed, reaching for me. "We can fix this. Counseling. Any just don't—" "No," I said, my voice flat, final. "There's no fixing this. It's over. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow. I want you out by the end of the week." Her knees buckled, and she crumpled to the floor, her sobs filling the room. I watched her, detached, the anger draining into a vast, icy void. I loved her, once loved her, with a fierceness that had defined me, but that was gone now, reduced to ash. I grabbed my jacket from the couch, the leather cool against my skin. "Pack your things," I said, not looking at her. "I'm done." Her cries followed me as I walked to the door, my boots heavy on the floor. I stepped the hallway, The door clicking shut behind me, a quiet, definitive end. The air was cool, the city hushed under a shroud of clouds. I stood there, the weight of it all settling on my shoulders, the betrayal, the loss, the unraveling of everything I'd known. But there was something else too, a spark of relief, faint but growing. I was free, free of her, of the lies, of the life that had been choking me. I pulled my phone from my pocket, scrolling to my lawyer's number. It was late, but I'd leave a message, set things in motion. The rain had stopped, the streets glistening under the streetlights. I stepped out into the night, the cold air sharp against my face, and started walking. It was over, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. I slumped against the couch, the cushions sagging under me like they'd given up too. The apartment was a Thompsonite, hollow, the air thick with the ghosts of last night. Ian and Sarah were gone, their footsteps long faded down the hall. Mia's sobs had stopped too. She'd shut herself in the bedroom after I'd walked out, leaving her crumpled on the floor. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, a terse text from my lawyer glowing on the screen. Papers ready tomorrow? Call me. I didn't reply. Not yet. The room was a mess, paper strewn from the divorce filing prep, my boots kicked off by the door, Mia's gym bag still slouched against the wall like a bad memory. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, and ran a hand through my hair. My chest felt heavy, like someone had parked a truck on it, but my hands were steady. The adrenaline was gone, burned out in the fire of facing Ian and Mia head on. What was left was a dull ache, exhaustion seeping into my bones. I stood, joints creaking, and shuffled to the kitchen. The counter was cold under my palms, grounding me as I stared at the laptop, the weapon that had ended it all. My phone buzzed again. A payment confirmation from Mia popping up. Money wired, it read. Her voice echoed in my head, ragged from our last call. I'm working nights now. I snorted, bitter. Fits you, I'd said, and hung up. Outside, dawn crept over Portland, painting the sky a bruised purple. I cracked the window, letting the crisp air sting my face. It was over messy, brutal, but done. I grabbed my gym bag, the weight familiar, comforting. Time to move on, time to breathe.